In this lesson, we will review the fleet management scenario for data manipulation. Data manipulation in Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations Enterprise Edition empowers the developer with tools to view, insert, update, and delete data elements within a database using X++ code. For the fleet management system, all of these factors will need to occur. So for example, to retrieve data about current customers, insert a new customer, or update an existing customer details information. So first, we can take a look and view the records. We can build and test. We can then go ahead and write an insert line of code or block of code, build and test that, and then continue to update, and then we'll go ahead and perform a deletion. In this lesson, we will review data retrieval or viewing of information. Returning data for viewing is a common feature that is used with development. You will need to read records from the database, and single calls can be possible for uniquely indexed tables. It's also important to note that more effective searches iterate over the whole table to ensure no items are missed. The select statement fetches data from the database to either be viewed or manipulated. All select statements use a table variable to fetch records. This variable must be declared before a select statement can be executed. The select statement is used to fetch records from the database. So instead of returning all fields from the record, you can specify a list of fields to retrieve. For tables with many fields that you only need a few fields of data, it is best practice for performance to just select the fields needed. If you are selecting a unique record from the database, you can only use the first only modifier on the select statement to quickly fetch and retrieve a single record. To view multiple records retrieved from a select statement, you can use the next statement. The next statement sets the table variable to the next record retrieved from the database. If you need to traverse a number of records, it is more appropriate to use a while select statement. This will handle the checking and looping of all records retrieved, and it is a best practice. If you use aggregate functions such as sum or count, the results are returned in the fields that you perform with the sum or count over. You can only count average or sum the integer and real fields. Often, to get the number of records in the database, you will do a count on the rec ID field, since that field will be able to store the results. Using this syntax chart, you can see the many different options that are available when retrieving data. So first, in our select statement, we can set parameters. So here we can have find options. We can select from an index clause options. We can also specify a field list from. We also have find options as well. So you can search for, the first 1,000 only or the first 100. You can force literals. You can say the first only or the first 10, and so on. We also have a field list select statement where you can specify the field. We also have the field select statement as well, where we can specify the field ID identifier. We also have aggregate, where we can use sum, average, min of, max of, and count. We also have additional options where we can specify the group by and order by if we want to sort by ascending or descending. We also have a where clause where we can use a where expression, and of course a join clause where we can use exists, not exist, and outer join parameters. Let's take a deeper dive into while select statement. So while select statements are used to handle data, and they are most widely used form of the select statement in X++. They loop over many records meeting certain criteria and can execute a statement on each record. When you perform data manipulation by using the while select statement, you could typically do this in a transaction to ensure data integrity. In a while select statement, the statement itself is executed only one time, immediately before the first iteration of statements in the loop. Also, any Boolean expressions, such as iCounter is less than 1, added to the while select statement are tested only one time. This differs from how the while statement behaves in languages such as C++ and C#. So for example, in X++, we have different loops that could iterate more than one time. So here we have a sample of the while select statement. So here we can see that we are instantiating our cust table and dir party table and calling them out in our code. And then we have our while select statement here starting on line 9. So we are selecting the dir party table and we are ordering it by name. And then we're using a join for where the cust table party is equal to the dir party table's rec ID. And then when we run this, we have just an info log that will display where we want to see the dir party table name. And then we have this followed by a comma and then the account number. In this demonstration, I am going to review a while select statement in some data manipulation X++ code that we have. So for this, I'm just going to go ahead and scroll down to our while select statement that we have in our view records method. So we basically just have a while select and we're selecting our FM vehicle table that we have initialized up above in this code. And then we are going to join FM vehicle where the FM vehicle RSM vehicle ID is equal to the RSM vehicle ID in our FM vehicle maintenance table. In this demonstration, we're going to review the view records method that we have in our code. So you can see here that I have all of my methods commented out, and what we can do is uncomment any method that we actually want to run and use. So for this first piece here, I can go ahead and uncomment our this method, and then we're going to take a look at our view records method. So here we can see that we are using our RSM vehicle maintenance table and the RSM vehicle table, and we then are going to set that to RSM vehicle 1. So anyway, so down below we have our view records method. So we'll go ahead and navigate to that. And so here you can see we have a while select statement. You can actually see that this has been commented out. We can actually uncomment this entire block of code here. And so basically, we already did go over this section here, but we didn't look at the view records method. And so basically, what we are doing is we are joining the FM vehicle table and the FM vehicle maintenance table where the RSM vehicle ID and the RSM vehicle ID on each of those tables is equal, and then we're going to display an info log. So here we're converting integer to string, and we want to see the vehicle ID and the make and model, and you can see that those are all separated by commas. And now I'll just go ahead and go back and re-comment this for our next demonstration. Now we'll review transaction integrity checking that is used with database manipulation in X++ code. It is important to ensure the integrity of all transactions within the system. When a transaction begins, to ensure data consistency, it must finish completely with predictable results. If the transaction terminates in the middle, the system should roll back to its state before the transaction began. You'll use the Transaction Tracking System, or TTS, to help you ensure database integrity. We have a few key words that will help in integrity checking. First is TTS begin. This indicates the beginning of the transaction. We then have TTS commit, which indicates the successful end of a transaction. This ensures the transaction performed as intended upon completion. And then lastly, we have TTS abort. This is used as an exception to abort and roll back a transaction to the state before the TTS begin. Nested TTS begins and TTS commits are ignored in that a lock is held until the last TTS commit is reached. However, the system does keep track of the TTS level. Each time a TTS begin is called, the TTS level increases by 1. Every TTS commit decreases the level by 1. If possible, you will want to make the TTS blocks as small as required. When a record is selected for update, it will lock the records or table to prevent another process from also modifying them. The shorter the transaction block, the less possibility for potential deadlocks. In this lesson, we will review data insert. There are three methods for inserting records. The first is insert. Insert is the most common method and inserts a single record at a time. We also have insert record set. This is used for bulk inserts and often used when inserting into a table from another. And then lastly, we also have insert database. This is used for when performance is needed and the insert method may perform slowly. When using this method, the records will be inserted as other logic continues to process. When a record is inserted, logic will also be called from the insert method on the table. This can be bypassed by setting the table variable property of skip data methods. Here we have a sample insert statement. So at the very beginning of this code, we are initializing a variable table buffer, which is the infant item price tolerance group table. And then here we're calling out how we're going to use it in our code. Now, below this is where we begin inserting our records, and we can note that by our TTS begin keyword for data integrity. So here we can see that we are inserting these records for these specific fields. So we have the item price tolerance group ID. We're explicitly setting that to 4%. We can then see the name field, and then we are going to be setting that as television series 1. And then we also have our insert method where we can see we are going to be inserting these records. And then we're also inserting another block of data. So we have the group ID as 6%, television series 2, and then we're inserting that data. And then at the very bottom, if everything has run smoothly and everything is being inserted, we have our TTS commit. And then once all of our records have been inserted, we're displaying an info log that says the records have been inserted. Here we have a sample insert record set. So as you can see here, we have our SQL dictionary that we are using, and then we have our buffer dictionary as well that we're going to be calling out for this. And then of course on line 9, you can see that we have our TTS begin. And now we're using our insert record set, and then we are setting our table ID, field ID, array name, and so on. And each one of these is going to be followed by a comma. And then here we can see that we are selecting, so we're selecting tab ID, field ID, and all of these of course are going to be separated by comma. And then we're going to be selecting that from the SQL dictionary. And then we're going to say where the SQL dictionary tab ID is going to be greater than 0. And then of course we end that block of code with our TTS commit. Now we're going to take a look at our insert records method. So what I can go ahead and do is uncomment the method that I want to use so it will execute. None of the other methods will execute as long as they are commented out here. So here we uncomment our insert records method, and I can go ahead and navigate to this. If I want to see where we're using this, I can actually just click on the insert records method and scroll down, and I can see it's highlighted here. So this is where we're using our insert records method. Now, another thing to point out is I can use this drop down to view all of my different methods here as well in the code editor. So here we begin with our TTS commit, and basically, or our TTS begin, and basically what we're doing here is we are using X++ code to insert records into our RSM vehicle ID table. So here we are saying we want to use the RSM vehicle ID, and basically what we're saying here in this line 52, we are going to want to get the last vehicle ID, and here we're using this method. So basically what we could do is we can take a look at this method if we wanted to. So we'll go ahead and scroll, I believe it might be up to that method. So basically what we're saying is we want to return the maximum of the RSM vehicle ID from this specific table, and we're adding 1 to it is what we're doing to create this new record. So, say the last record ID was number 6, it's going to look for the maximum of those those vehicle IDs, and then add 1 to it. So if it was 6, it would then add 1, and so we'd have the vehicle ID of 7. So that's what this first line here is doing, is we're calling this get last vehicle ID method. So then we're going to be setting the vehicle ID. And so say if the last one was 6, it'd be 7. And then we're inserting records, and we're explicitly setting these records. So for the RSM fuel level, we would set that to 0.75 for the make, Toyota, Corolla, and so on. And we're inserting all of these records for a vehicle ID. And then we're performing the insert method. And then we have another block where we're inserting another record. So again, we're getting the last vehicle ID. So maybe the last one was 6, and then this one will be 7, 8, and so on by using this method. And then here we can see that we're entering in our records and performing an insert. We add more records for a Dodge Ram and perform insert. And then lastly, we have our TTS commit to make sure everything is inserted and runs smoothly. And if that does, we will see an info log that says insert records complete. Now we can go ahead and run this if we wanted to. So make sure that you have your method uncommented and make sure that your class is set as the startup object, and we can press start. And basically what we're expecting here is we should just have a info log that displays that the records have been inserted. And we can see that the insert records has been completed. And I can stop running. In this lesson, we will review data updates. The update command modifies existing data in a table with the contents of a table buffer. The record is first retrieved from the database using a select statement. The data is then modified by assigning the new values to the fields in the table buffer. The new values are then committed to the database using the update method. Before records can be updated, you'll use select for update to exclusively set a record for update. This tells SQL that a record is to be updated and allows the database to lock that record so that another user cannot modify it at the same time. Update statements must always be placed within a transaction block. Also, a bulk update can be performed by utilizing update_record_set. Here we have a sample update statement. So what we have here is we're using the invent table and the invent item group item table as well. And so we're calling those here. And then we're beginning our TTS begin. So what we have here is a while select for update statement here on line 11. And so what we want to update is the invent table, as you can see here. And we're going to say we have an exists join for the invent item group item table. And we're basically saying here where the item ID in the invent item group item table is equal to the item ID in the invent table and the item group ID equals TV and video, we want to go ahead and update that record to be 7%. And then once that is done, we want a info log to display that the record has updated. And then of course we have our TTS commit. Here we have an update record set example. So here we're using our invent table and invent item group item table. We have our TTS begin, and then we have our update record set. So we're using the invent table here, and this is what we are setting here. So the item price tolerance group ID, and we are setting that explicitly to 7%, and the item buyer group ID, setting that to demo. And then we have an exist join for the invent item group item table, where the item ID in the invent item group item table is equal to the item ID in invent table, and the item group ID equals TV and video. and then we perform our TTS commit. Now in this demonstration, we're going to take a look at the update records method that we are using. So I'm going to comment our insert records method out, and I'm going to delete my comment for the update records method. And let's go ahead and find update records here in our code. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll down, and here we have our private void update records method. So here in this block of code, what we're doing is we have a while select for update statement, and we are going to be updating the FM vehicle table where the FM vehicle, the RSM vehicle ID is equal to 2. And what we want to do is anytime there's a 2 for the vehicle ID, we want to update that to say Yaris instead. And so right down below our while select for update where we have the RSM model that we want to update, and then we have our update method below to update. We'll then do our TTS commit, and then we display an info log that the update records has been completed. So we can go ahead and run this and see that this will basically just display an info log that says update records is complete. Now, if we want to actually see what we've been updating with this data manipulation, what we could do is we can look at the form that has these records. So I'm going to go ahead and close and stop running this, and I'm going to change my startup object to my RSM vehicle details form so we can actually see this. So I'm going to change my startup object by right-clicking on that vehicle details, and I'm going to go ahead and run this. So what we should see is all of these records that we have added. So we've inserted all these records in a previous section here. So if we look here, these are all of those records that we inserted. The Corolla, we updated that model to Yaris because it had a vehicle ID of 2. We added the Dodge Ram, the Toyota Corolla. So we can see everything that we have been doing within this form. In this lesson, we will review data deletion. The last step of this process is the delete function. You can quickly delete one record, dozens of records, or millions of records. It is very important to test this procedure in a non-production database with a small amount of data to ensure results. This will delete the current record for the database. To use this method, you'll specify which rows are to be deleted by using a where clause. Records are then removed one at a time from the specified table. The delete method can be overridden, so for example, to add extra validation before records are deleted. For performance, bulk deletes can be performed utilizing the delete from. Here we have a sample delete statement. So here we are initializing the event table and the event item group item table. So here again, we have our TTS begin, and we're using a while select for update statement here. So we are using the while select for update on the invent table, and then we have our exist join on the invent item group item table. And we're basically saying where the item ID in the invent item group item table is equal to the item ID in the invent table, and where the invent item group item group ID is equal to TV and video, we want to perform a deletion. And here we can see that delete method. And then once that is done, we're going to display an info log that says record deleted, and then we finish off our block with the TTS commit. Lastly, we have the sample delete underscore from. So again, we're initializing our event table and invent item group item table. We are deleting from, so basically we're using this delete from, and we're saying we're deleting from the invent table. And then we're saying we have our exist join, so we're using the invent item group item where the invent item group item ID is equal to the item ID in the event table. And The item group ID is equal to TV and video. That is where we're going to perform that deletion. And then we have our TTS commit to make sure everything processed smoothly. For this last demonstration, we are going to take a look at the delete records method. So from our previous, I'm going to go ahead and comment out what we were working on before, and I'm going to uncomment our delete records method so we can run it and execute. So let's go ahead and view this method, and we'll go ahead and scroll down, and here we can see our delete records. So we have our private void delete records method. We're starting our TTS begin, and here we're saying while select for update, we're going to update the FM vehicle table, where the FM vehicle table RSM vehicle ID is equal to 2. We want to go ahead and delete this record. And then once we're done, we should see an info log that says the delete records has completed. So we'll go ahead and run this and make sure that we switch our startup object to our class. And we can see that delete records is complete. So now let's go ahead and take a look and make sure that that record has been deleted. So I'm just going to go ahead and close out of this. I'm going to stop running this. And let's now change our startup object to our RSM vehicle table. I'll right click it and we'll go ahead and that's the table. We want to do the form. The vehicle details, we'll set that as the startup object, and we'll see that that Yaris record has been deleted. And here you can see that that Yaris record has now been deleted since it had that ID of 2. So it has successfully done what we wanted it to do.